that Bill Gates had just donated $50 million to Kamala Harris's campaign. It was a dark money donation. He didn't intend for it to be public. He's been indicted in the Netherlands for lying to the public about the COVID vaccine. You think that he wants to go to trial here in the United States of America? You think maybe that's one of the reasons he chose to give $50 million to Kamala Harris? We need to wonder when Kelly invents this story that says that, where he said that President Trump wanted generals around him who were like Hitler's generals, which of course he didn't say. We already know that Kelly is a liar. Thank you. You know, I was driving down here today from Atlanta, and I read an article from the New York Times that Bill Gates had just donated $50 million to Kamala Harris's campaign. And the article said that it was the first donation that he's made in 20 years, that he stayed out of politics, that he's been bipartisan. It was a dark money donation. He didn't intend for it to be public. He routed the donation through a 501c4, which was an organization that was set up to conceal large money donations to the Harris campaign. Now, he said, when the Times asked him, he said he had donated zero in the 2020 campaign when President Biden was running against President Trump. And he said this campaign is different than any other. And so he felt the need to do this. Now, do you think Bill Gates made that donation out of a patriotic impulse? Do you think he made it out of a humanitarian impulse? Do you think he made it because he wants global health? Or because he wants to make America healthy again? Well, there was something else, another article about Bill Gates that came out today that said he's just been indicted. He's been indicted in the Netherlands for lying to the public about the COVID vaccine. And he's going to have to go to trial. You think that he wants to go to trial here in the United States of America? You think maybe that's one of the reasons he chose to give $50 million to Kamala Harris? Oh, I want to point out somebody who's in the audience tonight. She's a woman named Sherry Peebles. And Sherry, are you here? Will you stand up if I can point you out? Okay, so Sherry Peoples is an African-American woman who has a daughter, Shayna, a straight-A student. She missed 60 days of school because she was in a hospital because she had sickle cell anemia. And her mom, Sherry, filled out all the forms, the federal and the state forms, explaining why she was missing her school. She did her schoolwork every day. She got straight A's, as I said. But Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of California. And Kamala Harris learned that the state was losing $1.3 billion a year because of truancy. And she said, I want that money. So I'm going to start putting parents in jail whose children skip too much school. Oh, she arrested Sherry Peoples in her home. The police came in and handcuffed her. And when she said, why am I being handcuffed? The police said to her, talk to Kamala Harris. They didn't want to be doing it either. She lost her job. She lost her home. And she still raised an extraordinary child. Don't you want a president of the United States who's going to end chronic disease rather than putting parents in jail? Don't you want an America president who's going to make our country healthy again? I saw another posting while I was driving down here today that shocked me too, actually. One was of President Obama saying that he didn't understand. That he didn't understand where all the division was coming from and the polarization in this country. And then there was another posting by Kamala Harris standing outside the Naval Observatory, which is the official residence of the Vice President of the United States, standing behind the presidential seal for our country, and comparing Donald Trump to Hitler. And saying that he was a fascist. And she based this extraordinary, irresponsible accusation on a story by John F. King, who was the director of Department of Homeland Security under Donald Trump and is a former Marine general and is deep into the deep state and to the intelligence apparatus in this country. Or John F. Kelly, I'm sorry. And Kelly told another story that Donald Trump had, during his presidency, Donald Trump learned that there was a Mexican-American soldier who had been murdered at Fort Hood, and that the Pentagon was refusing to pay her medical expenses, her funeral expenses. And Donald Trump said, if they won't do it, then I'm going to do it myself. And he paid her expenses out of his own pocket. And in order to discredit this extraordinary gesture of love and generosity by the American president, a soldier who he had never met before, John Kelly invented a story that he had made an insensitive remark about Mexicans. Unfortunately for Kelly, there were 3 people in the room at that time who all said that Kelly was lying, that it was an outright fabrication. So we need to wonder when Kelly invents this story that says that, where he said that President Trump wanted generals around him who were like Hitler's generals, which of course he didn't say. We already know that Kelly is a liar. And that Kelly invented other stories that were derogatory about the president. And these are the kind of stories you're seeing from all the generals and the intelligence agents who do not want to see Donald Trump in office again. And we have now somebody who's running for the presidency of the United States, a vice president, who is repeating these irresponsible stories. And to me, that alone disqualifies her for the presidency. You all know that when we were most Americans, when we're growing up, of my age at least, we were asked about this moral quandary about whether we would, if we could go back in time and kill a young Hitler, should we do that? And half the people say yeah, half maybe say no. But it's something that we all think about. And you think about how many unstable people there are in this country. And when you compare an American president to Hitler, you're pressing a button in those people to make them act on those violent aspirations and impulses. And it's at worst, don't you want a president who's going to bring America together again? Who's going to end the polarization and the division in our country? I left the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party left me. The Democratic Party that I grew up with was the party of peace. It was the party of constitutional rights, including free speech. It was the party of women's rights and women's sports. My uncle, Ted Kennedy, wrote Title IX to make sure that women could play sports with other women. It was the party of cops and firefighters and working people. And it was the party that stood up to Wall Street, the big banks, big ag, big pharma, big food, and all of the other vested interests that have gained ownership of our government and have captured our agencies and made them predatory against the American public. And the Democratic Party today is the party of war. It is the party of surveillance, of censorship. You listen to President Harris boast about the people who are supporting her, who have flocked now to the Democratic Party, people like John Kelly, people like Dick Cheney. Do you want Dick Cheney back in the White House? And people like John Bolton. These are the people who wrote the Patriot Act, the act that launched the surveillance state, that launched the national security state, that introduced torture, that introduced surveillance, and allowed the CIA to spy on the American public for the first time in our history. They're the people who gave us the Iraq War, who lied to us in order to get us into the Iraq War. That war was the worst foreign policy blunder in American history. That war cost $4.3 trillion. And we killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. We created ISIS. We drove 4 million refugees into Europe and destabilized every democracy in Europe for generations. Brexit is a direct result of that war. All the riots we're seeing now in European cities are a result of that war. The rise of totalitarianism across Europe, the end of free speech across Europe, is a result of that war. And don't you think we should have learned a lesson from that war? You think the Democratic Party learned that lesson? Do you think Dick Cheney has changed his opinion about the Patriot Act? No. He's changed parties because he thinks the Democratic Party is now the party of the neocons. It's the party of surveillance, of censorship, of war. And it's the party that is a cheerleader for big ag, for big pharma, or the people who are poisoning our children. The most existential threat that our country faces today is this chronic disease epidemic. When my uncle was president, I was a 10-year-old boy. 6% of Americans had chronic disease. 3% were obese. We spent $0 every year treating chronic disease. Zero. Today, 60% of Americans have chronic disease. About 70% are obese or overweight. Do you know how many people are obese and overweight in Japan? 3%. Same as here in 1963. We have 70%. 77% of American kids cannot qualify for military service. The diabetes rates in our country have gone from virtually zero. When I was a kid, the average pediatrician saw one case of diabetes in his entire 50-year career. Today, 1 out of every 3 children who walk through his office door is diabetic or pre-diabetic. When I was a kid, and today, in 70-year-old men, 1 in 10,000 people had autism. Today, 1 in every 34 of our children have autism. 1 in every 22 boys. This is existential for our country. We're spending $4.3 trillion on chronic disease. That's 5 times our military budget. This is going to destroy our country unless we have a president who's going to end it forever. And that's why I am fighting every waking moment of the next 15 days to make sure that Donald Trump is elected President of the United States. Now, when I was a kid, the Republicans controlled all the money in this country. 70% of the wealth in our country was owned by Republicans, about 30% by Democrats. Today, 70% of the wealth is owned by Democrats and 30% by Republicans. There's been a total inversion of policy and of the constituencies of both these parties. The Republican Party has been become the party of working people in this country. About a month ago, I was with Charlie Kirk. Let's give a big hand for Charlie Kirk. And he said to me, he said, Donald Trump ran all the billionaires out of the Republican Party, like Bill Gates. And yesterday, it was announced that Kamala Harris has raised $2 for every $1 that has been raised by Donald Trump. That's because it's all coming from people like Bill Gates. And they have all the money now. We have all the people. Do you think that Kamala Harris could put together a crowd like this? No, no way. We are going to win this by a landslide. USA. Don't you want a president of the United States that is going to defend our Constitution? I'll say one other thing. President Harris said today in her post, in her speech, she said that President Trump was going to turn the U.S. military against the American public and use the public to promote his agenda. How many of you think that is true? Well, what's interesting to me is that the Biden-Harris administration has done something 2 weeks ago that has never been done in American history, which is to send exactly lethal force, to send a directive to the Pentagon, changing the law to make it legal for the U.S. military to use lethal force against American citizens on American soil. Technically, now it's legal for the U.S. military under this directive. It will become legal for the U.S. military to shoot and kill Americans who engage in political protest because they disagree with policies in the White House. I'm not making this up. Any of you can look it up. This is a Democratic initiative. This did not come during the Trump administration. This did not come from Donald Trump. It came from the Democratic Party. And that's why I left the Democratic Party. Don't you want a president of the United States who is going to protect our Constitution? Don't you want a president who's going to end all the foreign forever wars? Don't you want a president who's going to stand up for free speech? Don't you want a president who's going to stand up for the Bill of Rights? And don't you want a president who is going to stand up for the Constitution of the United States in every way? And don't you want a president who has the guts to stand up to the CIA? And don't you want a president who is able to stand up to the military-industrial complex and to BlackRock and to Bill Gates and to State Street and Vanguard and Wall Street and Big Ag and Big Pharma and Big Food? And don't you want a president who's going to make America healthy again? And vote for Donald Trump. God bless you all, and God bless America.